Aggro decks have had a hard time sticking around the top tier of the competitive meta. There are a couple notable exceptions though, and one of them is Chernadogs. With the release of Arcasia's Island, many new dogs were released on the world of Lorcana, and it also unleashed this deck into the competitive meta. This deck derives its name from a few different cards. The Cherna comes from the card Chernabog, and the dogs, well, there are a lot of dogs in this deck, and some of them are very important to making it go. The key to this deck is the 7-cost Tramp Street Smart Dog. Now in a green-steel discard-heavy meta, this deck may struggle a little bit more than it did last set, but it can still pack a punch, so it's definitely worth being familiar with. And best of all, it's really fun to play. So with that in mind, I wanted to learn more about Chernadogs and what makes it tick. So I hunted down an expert. Actually, the deck's creator, Jack Morales, aka SSG Ghosty, and he's going to walk us through exactly how this deck works and why you should play it.
So Chernadogs is, I think, a very unique deck in Lorcana because it is, I like to say, a combo deck masquerading as an aggro deck. Because we, first and foremost, want to try to pull off this crazy combo, but we have plenty to do if it doesn't pan out, the absolute worst case scenario for this deck is that we're just a bunch of little guys turning sideways going fast, so I like that the deck has a backup plan, essentially. I have a lot of people that ask, what's the bad hand for this deck, and it's really just when you have all the Chernabogs in hand. Other than that, you're super happy. Yeah, one of the worst things that can happen with this deck is you finish your altar and you have 2 Chernabogs in hand, and you're just like, well, I'm playing with 2 less cards for the foreseeable future,
Now this deck features a pretty tight and consistent list, with mostly 4 copies of each card. As you would expect from an aggressive deck, it's pretty low to the ground, with 21 drops and 44 cards costing 3 or less. 12 of its 1-drops have 4 willpower, making them durable in the early game. And it has plenty of fun synergies and cards that work together. And that's the key to this deck, because it isn't straight aggro. As Jack describes it, it's a combo deck masquerading as an aggro deck. Now we'll talk about your first few turns in these combos in a moment, but before we do that, let's talk matchups. Which decks are you hoping to see, and what are you hoping to avoid? As you would expect, this deck is fairly good into most control matchups, including Ruby Sapphire. It's also fairly good into Ruby Amethyst. However, for bad matchups, you really don't want it to run into Emerald Steel Discard, and Under the Sea is one of the last cards that you want to see because it'll wipe your board. To understand a bit about why these matchups are good or bad, let's go to Jack.
So, this deck has a lot of good matchups, in my opinion, because of the fact that it can go so quickly and be so explosive. There are quite a few matchups that just don't have the interaction needed to disrupt the deck in a meaningful way. And so the best matchups for it tend to be ones that we can kind of just build up our board and then do a crazy explosive turn on turn 4 usually, before they can interact with it. So Amethyst Steel, Amethyst Ruby, and Amber Steel all tend to be pretty good for this deck because, especially Amethyst Ruby, they have no way of building a response to our massive boards. The best they can usually do is brawl on turn 3 to mess with us, and it's not enough to just take out one character from our board. And it's the same with Amethyst Steel and Amber Steel, except that unlike Brawl, we have Ursula, the Deceiver, to be able to remove songs from their hand. And if you remove their one Strength of a Raging Fire or something that they had ready to go to clear your character, now they can't even do that, right? And you're just able to go crazy in the next few turns. Pretty much all of the Emerald discard decks are pretty bad matchups for us. Emerald Steel, Emerald Amber, Emerald Amethyst, they all tend to be fairly difficult for us to do what we want because they have the Emerald discard cards that are able to kind of tear our hand apart and make it difficult for us to keep like the Street Smart Dog or Chernabog in our hand, because it just becomes a liability if we're trying to hold just like 2 cards in our hand going into their kind of turn 3, turn 4. They'll have singers out that can, sing Sudden Chill, or like Hypnotize can be really annoying when they just slam that on 3, and the one card we had in hand that was going to be coming out for very little ink the next turn is just now gone. And Amethyst Emerald has all of the rush characters and the crab and stuff, and things that make it difficult for us to turn our character sideways for early questing. And the Amber Emerald one has Under the Sea, which is literally this deck's like worst nightmare. Anytime an Under the Sea is resolved against us, we are losing pretty much our entire board, unless we happen to have a Chernabog out.
So now that we understand the matchups, what is this deck actually trying to do, and what are you looking to do in the first few turns to close out a game as quickly as possible? Well, I asked Jack for a few different openings that he likes to pursue through the first 4 turns, and he gave me a couple. One of them is absolutely bonkers, and the other one, well, this deck is actually so low to the ground that you can actually win the game after only playing 2 ink.
The biggest combo that you can pull off with this deck, like the dream sequence. And what's really interesting about it is it's actually something that you can only do on the draw, going second, which is pretty rare for an aggro deck to feel like they get a bonus by going second, and that's one of the things that I think makes this deck so strong too, is the fact that you've got really interesting play lines both going first and second. And so if you're going second against a deck like, say, Amethyst Steel, that's generally only packing 8 songs, 4 strengths and 4 Let the Storm Rage On, you have a pretty good chance of being able to rip those with Ursula. And so what I like to do is we'll go turn 1, we play a 1-drop, right? Turn 2, we'll play Ursula, check for removal. Turn 3, we play 3 1-drops. And what's cool about this is you can switch it up, where on turn 2 you could play 2 1-drops, and then on turn 3 just play Ursula plus another 1-drop. But either way, if all goes well, we have 5 characters on board going into our turn 4. And if you are going second and we've inked 3 times and played out those 5 characters, we'll have exactly 3 cards left in our hand. And if one of those cards is Street Smart Dog, you can now play it down for just 2 ink, because we have out 5 characters, reducing his cost by 5. Then he lets us draw 5 cards and discard 5 cards. Now, if we went into that draw with a second tramp, we're good, and we really don't care about the next 5 cards. But if we didn't, we now have 5 draws to try and find that second tramp. If we do, or if we already had it, we can now play it for 1 ink, because we now have 6 characters out on board, counting the tramp. So we play that for 1. And then we draw 6 cards and discard 6 cards. And we have just 1 card left in hand, meaning we have 6 more chances to sort of filter and try to find the big bad demon himself, Chernabog. And you're thinking, okay, well, we just played out 2 things, 1 for 2 and 1 for 1. All of our ink's been spent. We now have 1 uninkable card left in our hand. But guess what? It's Chernabog, and we just put 11 characters into our discard with the first 2 tramps, because the first one filtered 5, drew us 5, discarded 5. The second one drew 6, discarded 6. And Chernabog costs 10 and gets his cost reduced by 1 for each character in the discard. So if we just put 11 characters there, guess what costs 0 ink now? And we can play Chernabog. And now what that means is that we've just played 24 ink worth of characters with a grand total of 6 plus 6 plus 9, 21 willpower, and 7 lore pips for 3 ink. It's disgusting. Like, there's really no other word for it. And when you pull that combo off on turn 4, mind you, there is really not a whole lot of responses that exist in Lorcana right now that are able to address that. And then you get to quest out with the 5 characters we already had on board, and then you're threatening a ton more lore the next turn because they have to then try to clear everything you just quested with, as well as, you know, all the stuff we just played in for free, which again all has very big willpower, you know, 6 on each of the tramps, 9 on Chernabog, like. And I've got one other line that I want to talk about here that is my go-to on the play when there's a certain you know, my list is running 20 1-drops, and that's not counting the tramp enterprising dog, who's the 2-cost tramp that gets reduced by 1 if you have a lady out. So he's sometimes a 1-drop as well. And if you find yourself in a situation where you have one street smart dog and a bunch of 1-drops in your hand, you can actually go for the 2 ink victory. You literally do not need to ink past 2 because you play a 1-drop on 1. On turn 2, you ink and you play 2 1-drops. Then on turn 3, you don't ink. You stay at 2 and you play 2 more 1-drops. And what's great about this is, so now we're on the play. We have 5 characters out again going into turn 4, but we've only used 2 of our cards as ink, meaning that we've still got a few cards in hand, 3 specifically once we draw after our turn 4 draw. And if you have a 6th 1-drop, which again is not as crazy as it sounds given the fact that we're running, you know, 20 plus 4 half 1-drops, you can play that 6th 1-drop and now play a tramp for 1 because we've got 6. You draw 6, discard 6, and if you can find that 3rd tramp, or the 2nd tramp rather, you can play it as your 3rd character for turn for free on just 2 ink. And you now have no hand, meaning that if you do the trigger for that tramp, you'll draw 7, discard 7, and it'll just all go straight into the discard. But we don't even really mind that because we're running Lilo, the escape artist. So, you know, filling up the graveyard or discard for Lilos is nice just to, you know, we can pull those out since we won't have really much in hand the next turn. And also, we just played 2 tramps on turn 4. And a 1-drop as well, meaning that if we have any like decisive dogs on board, they got their full strength buff and will now be questing for 3. And again, it's just a very explosive turn 4, and you're doing it this time on only 2 ink, and you don't get the Chernabog out, unfortunately, but 2 tramps is fine, especially when we're on the play, meaning that we already had the sort of aggressive tempo advantage of just being able to quest early and spam the board. And what's really nice about this line too is you don't even have to fully commit, because if you get to turn 4 and your opponent has removed one of those 1-drops, meaning that we won't be able to do the crazy combo, you can still just ink up to 3 on your turn 4. And if they removed one of the 5 characters we had out at that point, you can play the tramp for 3, which is obviously not as great as playing him for 1, but you know, it's a nice sort of consolation prize and backup plan if they do decide to remove one of the characters. So it's not even necessarily as like all in as it seems, you know. But when it works, it's amazing. And then your opponents get to tell stories about how this guy just beat me on 2 ink, you know. And yeah, it's very, very cool.
Okay, those are your ideal openings. But anytime you play a deck, it's also important to understand how your game plan shifts depending on your matchup. So I asked Jack, what do you do if you run into Emerald Steel, a deck which you're really not excited to see and that can counter your opening pretty well?
Never too happy to see discard on the other side of the table, but there are ways around it. The deck can still get wins off even against its bad matchups, because even when we can't get super fancy and do all of the crazy combo turns, as I like to refer to them, we can still kind of just do the aggro thing where we're just, playing daisies out in the early turns and questing away for dear life, hoping that we're able to close the game out before they find an under the sea or something. So given the meta that's kind of shaping up in set 8, this will probably be an important line for people to know, because these Emerald decks might be kind of popular. And so against these decks, I like to lead with a turn 1 Daisy, or any of our 1-drops that are a bit more durable. We don't want to be playing a 1-drop with only 2 willpower, but something with at least 3 or 4 on turn 1 is nice. You can follow that up on turn 2 with an Ursula to check for any pesky discard songs or songs that will damage our characters. And then on turn 3, play Kit Cloudkicker, who is an absolute godsend to this deck, because we have so many characters that we're trying to protect from songs and things like that you've got the Ursula, Deceiver of All, you've got Ariel, the Spectacular Singer, these really powerful singers that come down on your opponent's turn 3. If you can respond by playing a kit and sending that singer right back to their hand, it means that the characters that we've just played and the characters we'll play on the next turn will hopefully be a bit safer. And so I love to hit that curve, because then on turn 4 we can, we've been playing relatively conservatively compared to like the combo turn that combo line I'd previously described. So we've got a lot more cards in hand at this point, so you can kind of pad against discard if they go for that, or just try to empty the hand out pretty quickly after that by just playing out a bunch of 1 and 2 drops on turn 4. Because against these discard decks, we tend to not really want the game to go on very long. So trying to just keep them off those singers that will disrupt our board while just questing away each turn is really nice. And so it's not quite as flashy as some of the other lines we can do, but it is very effective. So it's a great one against any song-based deck or discard-based deck.
Now that we understand the first few turns, let's talk about altering your hand. Those who played Lorcana for even a little bit know that you can actually win or lose the game based on how you rearrange your hand after your first draw. And luckily, in Chernadogs, altering your hand is pretty straightforward.
When I'm altering my hand at the start of a game, assuming that I'm blind and have no idea what my opponent is playing, I am really just looking for 2 cards. I'm looking for Daisy and our Street Smart Dog, that's Tramp 7. Because those are our 2 most reliable cards in pretty much every matchup. Daisy is an absolute all-star because she is the one drop that sort of checks every single box for us. She quests for 2, which is amazing. What aggro deck doesn't love a 1-drop that quests for 2? But she also has 4 willpower, which means that against the steel decks, their removal is generally pretty ineffective early on. When your opponent has to use a Long Came Zeus on a 1-drop, you're pretty happy. So I love Daisy on the blind for that exact reason, because we just know whether we're going up against red blue and they're gonna be controlling like crazy, and they've got, the Sisus that can remove all of our 1-drops and stuff. She's going to put in some work before she does get removed. Against steel, she's going to be very hard to remove, and she's going to get us a lot of lore along the way no matter what. And then Tramp, we want to try to find those as much as possible, because that's the way that we really just break the game wide open. And especially in the blind, where we're not exactly sure like what specific tech cards we might want, having a character that lets you just filter through the deck very quickly is super handy, because you go, oh, this is a matchup where I'm gonna really want Cricky, right? Well, we can play Tramp and try to find Cricky. Or, if we're playing against a match where, oh, they're running all the songs and we want to try to find Ursula, or Kit or something, we can try to find that. So really fantastic card when you don't know what you're going up against. And then if it turns out that you saved it and it's a matchup where we're not really gonna need the Tramp, or we won't be able to go for a crazy combo turn, he's inkable, because he is for some reason needed to be even more powerful. He can just go right in the inkwell and let you play the other stuff you need. Now, the cards that I never want to see in the altar are Chernabog, Rapunzel, and Cricky, and also the Shift Tramp, Dapper Rascal, I think his name is. Yeah, those ones are just a little too expensive for us to have in the opener. If we do have them, they're generally going to be ink in the first couple turns, because while there are a lot of matches where like playing a Cricky can be game winning, in the first few turns we don't have the luxury of being able to like hold a Cricky in the hand and just say, yeah, we'll get to this eventually. It's like it's just got to go in the inkwell. So I'm generally sending all of those back, and then Chernabog should be hopefully pretty obvious. You don't want a 10 cost uninkable character in your opening hand pretty much under any circumstances. We love to find him off the Tramp 7 effect, but holding it in hand is very risky. I think I've done it like maybe once in my whole life when I had like everything I needed to be able to do it. But even then, you'd rather just have a card you could ink, yeah, so anything that costs more than 3, typically we're just getting rid of, because we want to spend our first few turns just inking and playing out 1-drops and stuff. So
we understand the early game, but what about the late game? I asked Jack about this, and of course he chuckled a bit, because Chernadogs suffers from some of the same issues that many other aggro decks do in TCGs and in Lorcana. They can run out of gas fairly quickly. This deck is trying to win fast, and if it doesn't do that, the end game can get a bit tricky. Luckily, Chernadogs has a few cards which can help us close things out, and that includes Chernabog, a ginormous threat that's very difficult to remove from the board, and Lilo Escape Artist, which you can recur from your discard pile again and again to widen your board a little bit as you're trying to drop threats to close out the game. Here's how Jack described the endgame.
The endgame for this deck is an interesting even term, I think, for it, because it's like, as a deck that plays so low to the ground, what really is the endgame? But generally, the most pivotal turn in this deck is turn 4, because you need to know exactly, from the beginning, are we going to try to pull off a crazy combo on turn 4, or are we going to do something more reasonable, like play a Rapunzel or shift our Tramp? That's a new one in Jafar that is really nice. And once you know kind of like what path you're on, you can start to plan for it accordingly. Because if you're gonna try to go for a crazy combo, you generally have to keep your characters upright. You can't turn them sideways for questing and stuff, because we risk losing them and making our Tramp more expensive. But if you're gonna be playing Rapunzel on turn 4, turning everything sideways is pretty good, because you can, your opponent will start to turn their guys sideways to try to remove things, and that's where, we have like a million Rapunzel traps in the deck with all of the 0/4s like Little John and Nala and Daisy and any of the bigger tramps with 6 and 8 willpower. The shift tramp being able to swing into even a Maui hero to all and then still get healed off Rapunzel is just insane to me. I love that card so much. But knowing kind of which of our turn 4 plays is really important, because that is what sort of segues us into the sort of mid-end game, which is a little bit anomalous with this deck. It all kind of melds together a bit. Because if we got off a combo, obviously the game will be over pretty quick. But if not, we need to try to do everything we can to just keep getting incremental lore with quests and stuff, and sort of filling up our discard like the old-fashioned way. And there's plenty of games like against Red Blue, or like even sometimes against like Amber Steel, if they did happen to have just a few too many songs for us to deal with, and they disrupted our early game, where we're kind of going into these later turns, and slamming down a Chernabog for 4 or 5 ink actually becomes pretty reasonable in this deck if you have one that's in hand and you couldn't get out early. You just keep turning everything sideways, and they kind of have to deal with it. If you can hit some Rapunzels or shift in the tramp to get more value out of them removing our characters, that's great. But otherwise, the Chernabog coming down just on like turn 6 for 3 ink or something while you play out another character is pretty nice. We also have Go-Go in the deck, which comes in huge in those games that get to the point where, we are maybe kind of running out of steam a little bit, and we're looking for avenues to just limp across the finish line. Go-Go is absolutely incredible because she lets you, our opponent has spent the whole time up to this point removing all of the characters we've been playing, and hopefully there's been some incremental damage buildup that we can profit off of, and use that to get over the finish line. But you can also sometimes use at 5 ink or 6, if you don't have a lady out, you can play Tramp Enterprising Dog, buff up one of our little characters, have them swing into something with a lot of willpower. I used to do this a lot to Hiram, rest in peace, but I've also hit other high willpower characters like Sonic Warrior. You hit something and you don't banish it, you leave it alive with just 1 health, and then you slam down that Go-Go for sweet lore gains. Because like when you can, I've gotten 5 off of Hiram, I've gotten 7 off of the Sonic Warrior. You could do it to, a Tamatoa or something, but sometimes, against this deck, people will just turn everything sideways because like, oh, all your guys don't hit for anything, it's no big deal. And then all of a sudden you have a Nala swinging for 7 and they go, oh wait, hang on, what? So yeah, the Tramp with Go-Go can be really, really powerful for closing out games once you've hit those higher ink counts. And I say higher ink counts, like 5 is a lot, but for this deck it really is. So the Chernabog, Go-Go, those are kind of the big ones. I suppose one other one I should mention, I've said his name quite a bit, but we haven't actually talked about where he comes into play, is Cricky. Cricky is an absolute all-star when you're playing against other aggressive decks like the lower to the ground Amber Steel decks, or the like Kiwi Birds Blue Steel. All of those kinds of decks that kind of just want to keep turning sideways with these aggressive characters. If you can build up to 5 ink while maintaining a decent board, Cricky comes down and just allows you to completely take control over the game, because all of your 0/4s become 3/4s. All of your 1 strength characters are now hitting for 4. And it's just absolutely massive when everyone's looking at your board, seeing a board of 0 and 1 strength characters, and then all of a sudden they're hitting for 3 and 4, right? So it really allows you to shift tempo into your favor, and Even if the game has been going long or getting away from us a little bit, it can just completely take it back and swing things back for us.
Before we close things out, I want you to hear Jack's thoughts on a couple other cards in this deck that are pretty important. One of them is Cricky, and one of them is Lilo. Because if you're going to run this deck, or you're going to run into it, you need to understand when and where these cards are used and why they're in the deck. Lilo in particular is really important to understand because you can fall into a trap of wanting to play her really, really late in the game and not using her efficiently.
I see so many people that ask me, they're like, oh, why don't you just have Piglet in this deck? You know, like, why Lilo over Piglet? And Piglet's great, you know, he quests for 3 a lot of the time, but we already have so many cards that are like there just for pure lore. Lilo does something really amazing for this deck, which is allows us to essentially have additional cards in our hand that aren't really in our hand. Because the really important thing with Lilo is to weave her in to your other turns and not just wait to be, okay, I have nothing left in hand. I have no more cards left on the board. Let's start pulling Lilos out of the discard, right? What you want to do is, like, when you are like fresh off, like maybe you played just a tramp on turn 4, and the opponent had, you know, a decent amount of removal. So we played our tramp for 3 ink or 4 ink or something, you know. We didn't go too crazy. We're just playing out some guys and had a decent turn 3, turn 4. And you can actually chuck Lilos into the discard with that filter effect, right? We draw 3, we discard 2 of them happen to be Lilos, and then the next turn we quest with everything, you know, Tramp himself included, but at the top of that turn we put 2 Lilos out of the discard onto the board. And sure, they've come into play exerted, but the entirety of our board is exerted, right? So now you've just added additional things that your opponent needs to deal with before next turn, and we're gonna, you know, quest for even more. And if any of those Lilos live, or if they were removing other characters, or now have targeted the Lilos instead of those other, it's like, it really, no matter how you slice it, it ends up doing wonders for us. So that's a card that I just see a lot of people really underestimate and think that it's like your sort of like last resort card, when really it's just, you have to think about those Lilos in your discard as like an extension of your hand, you know? So I love that card, and I think it's just really, really effective for what this deck wants to do.
So there's one more big idea and theme that you need to understand and internalize if you're going to play this deck, and that is patience. Oftentimes with aggressive decks, the idea is to turn characters sideways as fast as possible to put them at risk in order to gather lore. But with this deck, that's not necessarily what you want to do. This deck is built around synergies and combos, particularly in the first 4 turns. Sometimes, if you put your characters at risk unnecessarily, you can risk this deck's entire game plan.
Play safe, because I feel like with aggro decks specifically, there's a lot of like, first instinct is just every single turn you're just turning everything sideways to quest and get as much lore as fast as possible. And while there are certainly some games where that is the correct line, a lot of times when you have the street smart dog, you want to try to preserve your characters on board for as long as possible, because if you're, say for example, you have like a Daisy, right? And we're on the draw. So our turn 1 Daisy, the moment she turns sideways the first time, she's already being threatened by like a crab or a fox from the opposing amethyst player, right? She's only ever going to get 1 quest off then because of that, because it'll just immediately get banished by a turn 3 fox. And if that's the case, you're better off not taking that first opportunity to quest. Instead, you leave her standing up and you wait until we're able to play out a bunch more characters, get out that tramp for, you know, cheap or nothing if all goes well. And then on that turn, you turn everything sideways, because one, they're going to have a much tougher time answering every character on our board if they're all turned sideways at the same time. And we got the big payoff of getting out the tramp, right? Where if we had just taken that initial quest with that daisy and it got, popped by a fox immediately, it still got us that 2 lore, right? Except that that's all it did. And if we wait, we get so much more out of it. So unless your hand is looking like, again, you're going to maybe be playing like a Rapunzel on turn 4 or something, you really don't want to be questing too recklessly, anytime you quest in this deck, just think, or before you quest, I should say, think about whether or not they have ways to address the character, and if we need that character to stick around, because that is one of the number one mistakes I see with people picking up this deck, is they just go, oh, it's an aggro deck, turn everything sideways, and it's like, yes, but but do it at the right time, so patience is key with this deck.
So that's Chernadogs. It's a really fun deck to play. It has a fantastic name, and if you get your opening right, it has the possibility to blow out your opponents before they even know it hit them. But does this deck stand a chance in what looks to be a very discard-heavy meta? Well, yes, it's actually pretty good against many of the control decks that have been around for ages. And against Emerald Steel, well, it does have some openings that give you a chance. And if you get your opening combo and the Emerald Steel deck doesn't start strong, you can still blow them out before they even get going. But you do have to keep in mind that the more Emerald Steel there is and the more Under the Seas you have running around, the worse this deck is in a particular meta. But what about this deck's viability after the release of Fabled this summer, when the first 4 Lorcana sets will rotate out of the core constructed format? Will this deck still be good? I asked Jack about this because there's about 5 cards in this deck which will rotate out unless they're reprinted, and I thought that several of them were key to this deck's functioning. And Jack said, actually, no. The cards that are rotating out, including one of the deck's namesakes, Chernabog, are actually kind of the icing on the cake. As long as you can run a bunch of low-cost cards and that 7-cost tramp, this deck will go. And actually, that many of the cards rotating out will weaken a lot of other decks in the format, so in Jack's opinion, the future of this deck is actually bright. Chernadogs could be around for a very long time. So that's it. What do you think about Chernadogs? Is this a deck that you've played before? Is it a deck that you're excited to play? Or maybe a deck that you've run into in a tournament somewhere? Let us know in the comments below. We want to know what you think. And if you're interested in really mastering this deck, make sure you check out Jack's Metafy, where you can get all sorts of tips and tricks, and he's even available for coaching sessions. There's no better person to teach you a deck than the one who created it.